If you think terrorists only exist in war zones, then you haven't heard this story. Austria, a country nestled in the heart of Europe, known for its peaceful landscapes, classical music, and snow-capped mountains. But would you believe me if I told you that just a few decades ago, in the middle of this quiet, picturesque land, a man was spreading fear using something as simple as a letter, a wooden sign, a harmless-looking package? And then, boom! A body part blown off. Screams piercing the cold night air. No trace of the killer. No warning. Just death. And silence. Welcome to Cold Blood Files channel, where we bring you true stories darker than fiction, real-life crimes, and the twisted minds behind them. If you enjoy chilling tales like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another upload. Today, we dive into one of the strangest and most disturbing criminal cases Austria has ever seen, where a loner, living in a sleepy rural town, single-handedly waged a personal war of terror that lasted 4 long years and shook the nation to its core. He wasn't part of any terrorist group. He had no accomplices. And even more bizarre, he did it all out of pure hatred, and a fantasy ideology he created in his own mind. A single bomb killed 4 Roma men outside their home. 24 mail bombs were sent to politicians, journalists, priests, and unsuspecting civilians. A mind isolated, consumed by rage, operating in plain sight, yet invisible to everyone around him. That man's name? Franz Fuchs. The media would later call him the Austrian Unabomber. And you won't believe what happened next until you see this story through to the end. So, what turned an ordinary man into the most dangerous domestic terrorist in Austrian history? How did an unemployed engineer, living alone, build sophisticated bombs that outsmarted police and forensic experts for years? And what lay behind the cryptic death threats, the coded letters, and a so-called army that never existed? The story you're about to hear isn't just about crime, it's about a descent into madness, born from isolation and poisoned by hate. Get ready. Because this isn't an easy story to hear. But once you begin, you won't be able to stop. Let's begin the journey into the mind of Franz Fuchs, Austria's most dangerous lone wolf bomber. The most dangerous people are not those who shout their anger, but those who quietly let it fester until it explodes. In almost every community, there is someone who keeps to themselves. The neighbor whose curtains are always closed. The man who walks alone, never smiles, never speaks unless spoken to. People don't really notice him, or if they do, they simply shrug him off. Franz Fuchs was exactly that kind of man. Quiet. Withdrawn. Odd, even by small-town standards. He wasn't the type to make friends. He didn't throw parties, didn't join clubs, and certainly didn't chat with neighbors over coffee. Most people didn't even know what he did for a living. To them, he was just the weird guy down the street. And that's exactly how he liked it. But what they didn't know was this. While the world ignored him, Franz Fuchs was watching, listening, and planning. Fuchs was born in 1949 in Grala, a small town in the Austrian state of Styria. From a young age, he was considered different, not rebellious or dangerous, just different. Teachers found him intelligent but emotionally cold. He didn't relate well to others and preferred being left alone. In his early adult life, Fuchs studied electrical engineering, but never managed to hold a long-term job. Some say he was too smart to fit in, but the truth is more unsettling. He was too angry to cooperate, too bitter to blend in. As he drifted between jobs and slowly detached from society, his bitterness only deepened. At some point, Fuchs stopped blaming himself for his loneliness, and started blaming the world. Immigrants, politicians, journalists, human rights activists. To Franz Fuchs, these were not people, they were symbols of a country he believed was betraying its own identity. Here's where it gets chilling. Fuchs didn't just harbor hateful thoughts. He nurtured them, watered them, let them grow into an entire ideology. An imaginary belief system where he, a solitary Austrian man, was the last line of defense against the corruption of his country. In his mind, Austria wasn't evolving, it was being invaded. By immigrants, by multiculturalism, by liberal politicians and globalist ideals. What's more disturbing is that he believed he had a moral obligation to act. Not through voting, not through protest, but through violence. He began to see bombs not as weapons, but as statements. And because no real movement would support him, he invented one. He began signing his letters and manifestos as a member of the Bavarian Liberation Army, BBA, a group that didn't exist. It was all smoke and mirrors, designed to mask the simple truth. Franz Fuchs was just one man. Alone. Unhinged. And ready to make the world bleed. It's important to note that Fuchs had no real relationships. No romantic partners. No close friends. No community. He lived in a modest, cluttered house where he spent hours tinkering with electronics and writing angry letters to newspapers and politicians. His world had shrunk to a narrow tunnel vision, one where he was the hero and everyone else was the enemy. And in this isolation, he found something terrifying: freedom. Freedom to plan without interference. Freedom to build bombs in peace. Freedom to believe in a fantasy where he was fighting a noble war. This is the paradox of the invisible man. The more society ignored him, the more powerful he felt. While no one paid attention to Franz Fuchs, he became convinced that his mission was righteous, even sacred. By the early 1990s, something had shifted. Fuchs was no longer content to watch the world he hated from the shadows. He wanted to send a message. But unlike other extremists, he wasn't interested in attention or fame. He didn't make YouTube videos. He didn't post manifestos online. Instead, he turned to an old but deadly method. Mail bombs. Simple. Silent. Devastating. And, perhaps most importantly for Fuchs, anonymous. When the first package exploded, authorities had no idea they were dealing with a domestic terrorist. There was no organization, no chatter, no leads. Just victims, and a trail that led to nowhere. Let's pause for a moment. It would be easy to call Franz Fuchs a monster and move on. But doing that would miss the bigger picture. He wasn't born evil. He wasn't possessed. He was shaped by neglect, by alienation, by ideas left unchecked. He was a warning. A warning of what happens when hate festers in silence. A warning of what happens when no one is paying attention, until it's far too late. Sometimes, the most terrifying monsters don't wear masks, they wear silence. When the first bomb exploded, no one suspected a coordinated attack. It was Austria, after all, a peaceful, orderly country nestled in Central Europe. Acts of terrorism weren't part of the national consciousness. But that illusion of safety was about to be shattered. Franz Fuchs, the invisible man, had begun to move. Quietly. Methodically. Fatally. The year was 1993. Somewhere deep in the countryside, Fuchs was crafting small, precise devices using wires, batteries, and household materials. He wasn't just making bombs, he was creating symbols. Every package he built, every fuse he tested, every envelope he sealed, all of it was part of a twisted ideological campaign he believed the world needed to see. But he didn't send them to embassies or enemy governments. No, he sent them to people. Ordinary people. Fellow Austrians. The first target was Father August Janich, a Roman Catholic priest known for his outspoken support of immigrants. Fuchs saw him not as a man of faith, but as a traitor. Then came Silvana Meixner, a journalist who had written about minority rights. One after another, the bombs arrived, concealed inside innocent-looking packages. Some exploded. Some didn't. But the message was always the same. You are not welcome in the Austria I believe in. And with each incident, the fear began to grow. Alongside the bombs, Fuchs began mailing letters. These weren't crude threats or angry rants, they were strangely formal, full of nationalist slogans and cryptic references. Each letter was signed by the Bavarian Liberation Army, or BBA for short. It sounded like a militant group. It sounded organized. It sounded dangerous. But here's the truth, there was no such organization. It was a fiction. A smokescreen. A psychological weapon. Fuchs knew that people fear the unknown more than the known. So, he created a ghost army, and the entire country fell for it. What made Fuchs so effective wasn't just the explosives, it was his ability to make Austria believe he wasn't acting alone. The media speculated. Was this part of a rising neo-Nazi resurgence? Was there a paramilitary network hiding in the countryside? Could this be a foreign-sponsored attack? No one thought it was just one man with a screwdriver and a deep grudge. Fuchs watched from his quiet home, reading the headlines, feeding the panic. He didn't need accomplices, the paranoia he created did the work for him. Austria had no precedent for this kind of domestic terrorism. The idea that someone born and raised in the heart of Europe could be radicalized by his own disillusionment, not by religion, not by foreign ideology, was something society wasn't prepared to face. The police were scrambling. There were no fingerprints. No DNA. The bombs were homemade but sophisticated. And the victims? They were targeted not for who they were, but for what they represented. In truth, Fuchs was sending a political message dressed as random violence. Let's not underestimate him. Franz Fuchs wasn't some wild-eyed madman playing with wires. He was methodical, even obsessive. His bombs were built using basic tools but wired with precision. He tested pressure triggers, timers, trip wires, experimenting until he achieved exactly the kind of explosion he wanted. And the timing? Always spaced just far enough apart that people would start to relax, right before the next one struck. That's the terror of a phantom. He vanishes, just long enough to make you think he's gone. Then strikes again. In 1994, Fuchs set his sights higher. This time, the target was Helmut Zilk, the former mayor of Vienna and a nationally recognized figure. A letter bomb was delivered to Zilk's home. When he opened it, the device detonated, blasting off part of his hand. The message couldn't be clearer. No one is safe. Not even you. This was no longer just a fringe threat. This was terrorism in the heart of Austrian power. The illusion of safety, once chipped, was now fully shattered. With the attack on Zilk, the story exploded, no pun intended, across headlines. Talk shows debated the rise of extremism in Austria. Newspapers printed grainy photos of burned hands and damaged walls. Citizens demanded answers. Justice. Safety. But there was nothing. The police had no suspect. No leads. Just a growing list of victims and a shadowy organization that wasn't real. And the more they searched, the more the public panicked. Fuchs had become a ghost, not just in the literal sense, but in the national psyche. He was everywhere and nowhere. A myth. A threat. A question with no answer. As the bombs continued to arrive in mailboxes across the country, fear took root in everyday life. Postal workers refused to deliver suspicious packages. Offices installed metal detectors and security cameras. Citizens avoided opening anything they didn't recognize. In a matter of months, Fuchs had turned mail, a symbol of connection, into a weapon of division and terror. This wasn't just a crime spree anymore. It was psychological warfare. But Fuchs wasn't finished. He had one final message to deliver, and it would be the deadliest of all. Some deaths don't just take lives, they destroy the faith of an entire community. Austria, known for its snow-covered Alps, elegant cities, and rich classical heritage, seemed like the last place you'd expect terror to unfold. But on a cold February evening in 1995, death arrived in the form of a small wooden sign hanging quietly near a Roma neighborhood in Oberwart. February 5, 1995. A date now etched in Austria's memory. A date that turned a quiet rural town into the site of one of the country's deadliest hate crimes. That evening, someone had nailed a hand-painted sign near the Roma housing settlement. It read, Roma Zurich nach Indien. A cruel, racist message aimed at an already marginalized community. To the Roma, who had endured decades, even centuries, of discrimination, the sign was not only offensive. It was a provocation. So 4 Roma men stepped out to remove the sign, a gesture of defiance, pride, and dignity. But the moment they touched it, boom! An explosion tore through the air. Limbs were scattered across the ground. All 4 men were killed instantly. Their bodies were mutilated beyond recognition. This was not a warning. It was not a message. It was an execution. Until now, Franz Fuchs had targeted politicians, clergy, journalists, people of symbolic influence. But Oberwart marked a terrifying shift. For the first time, Fuchs had targeted an ethnic minority, with no connection to politics, law, or the media. He had crossed a line into open, racialized hatred. The blast didn't just shake Oberwart. It shook Austria. Because it forced the country to confront something it had long avoided. The violence of silence. The cost of pretending hate didn't exist. For decades, the Roma people in Austria had lived as second-class citizens, looked down upon, ignored, stereotyped. Now, They were being hunted. After the massacre, many Roma parents stopped sending their children to school. Some families moved away. Others began carrying pepper spray, or simply lived in fear. A community had been terrorized, not by a government, not by a militia, but by one man. Fuchs never left a message at the scene. He didn't claim responsibility. He didn't need to. His bomb had spoken clearly. To Fuchs, the Roma weren't people. They were symbols of everything he hated: immigration, multiculturalism, integration. Killing 4 men wasn't a crime in his eyes. It was a cleansing. A self-appointed mission to protect Austria's purity. He didn't need an army. He didn't want fame. He only wanted fear. Just one day after the Oberwart massacre, another mail bomb exploded, this time injuring a Croatian janitor who opened a suspicious letter. Inside the envelope, a small piece of paper carried the words, "Zurich nach Dalmatien." Once again, it was a racial slur disguised as a message. And once again, Fuchs was invisible. No fingerprints. No DNA. No trace. But the pattern was clear now. These weren't random acts. These weren't political statements. These were ethnic purges, carried out by one man with an ideology of hate and the skills of a trained engineer. Was this the work of a neo-Nazi group? A foreign extremist cell? Or, still just one man? The thought was chilling. Could a single person really do this? Build bombs? Mail them? Rig them to explode on impact, and vanish without a trace? The answer would soon shock everyone. The Oberwart massacre marked the deadliest moment in Franz Fuchs's campaign of terror. But it also marked a turning point. No longer could Austria ignore what was happening. No longer could the Roma community be treated as invisible. And no longer could the police afford to chase shadows. They needed answers. Because somewhere out there, the most dangerous man in Austria was still planning his next attack. There's nothing scarier than a killer who leaves no trace, except knowing he might be watching you, even as you remain unaware. After the Oberwart bombing, all of Austria awoke from its illusion of peace. No longer just isolated explosions. No longer anonymous suspects. Now, the nation was face to face with a serial killer, a man fueled by deep-rooted racial hatred, armed with ruthless bomb-making skills, and the terrifying ability to vanish like a ghost. In less than 2 years, 25 explosive devices had been deployed. Some detonated. Some were intercepted in time. But all bore chilling similarities. Meticulous construction. No fingerprints. No biological traces. And most disturbingly, targeted at immigrants, journalists, priests, and pro-human rights politicians. Franz Fuchs wasn't just a bomber. He was a meticulous executioner, using his hands and tools to carry out a lone campaign of terror. The police now knew they were dealing with a lone genius, someone who didn't need accomplices, didn't seek fame, and didn't crave recognition. Authorities launched one of the largest investigations in Austrian history, assembling a task force of bomb technicians, forensic experts, behavioral analysts, and handwriting specialists. But every trail ended in dust. Each bomb was designed like a masterpiece of death, triggered by tiny wires rigged to mailbox lids, hidden in envelopes or deceptively harmless packages. And more terrifying still, Fuchs kept changing his designs, making even bomb disposal units feel unprepared. Investigators theorized he must be a military expert or high-level engineer. But no one matched the profile. No prior records. No history of violence. No suspect even remotely stood out. Fuchs remained just a blur in the shadows, dismissed by his neighbors as eccentric, odd, but harmless. Criminal profilers reached a dangerous conclusion. If he doesn't want to be found, then he won't be. Fuchs wasn't your average terrorist. He didn't take responsibility. He didn't make demands. He didn't even try to spread his ideology. He just wanted revenge. Revenge on those he thought were polluting Austria. Revenge on a world he believed had abandoned him. And the scariest part, Fuchs believed he was doing the right thing. After the Oberwart massacre, a typed letter appeared, supposedly from a group calling itself the Bavarian Liberation Army. It claimed responsibility. But something felt off. No one had ever heard of this group. No evidence of activity. No structure. No spokesperson. Gradually, profilers offered a radical theory. What if the group doesn't exist? What if it's just one man, inventing an entire organization as a smokescreen? A one-man terror campaign, backed by a fictional army, an invisible threat hiding behind a ghost army he created in his own paranoid mind. It was as brilliant as it was terrifying. Because how do you track down a collective that doesn't exist? In late 1996, a turning point. A man in the quiet town of Grauer reported suspicious behavior. His neighbor was frequently mailing packages, acting strangely at the post office, and rarely interacting with anyone. Police began surveillance. Their attention turned to a reclusive man named Franz Fuchs, a former electrical engineer who had failed professionally, lived alone, and was considered an introvert at best, a weirdo at worst. At first, nothing stuck. But then, as police noticed more unusual mail activity, they decided to act. On October 1, 1997, a tactical team intercepted Fuchs while he was out riding his bicycle. That's when it happened. Realizing he was about to be arrested, Fuchs pulled a small homemade device from his pocket and detonated it. His left hand was blown to pieces on the spot. A grotesque scene, right in the middle of the street. But somehow, he survived. He was rushed to the hospital, bleeding out, his body mangled and broken. But the truth was undeniable. Austria's most feared domestic terrorist had finally been unmasked. You might think this is where the story ends. But no, not yet. Some trials don't just sentence a man, they expose the darkest corners of a society. In October 1997, when Franz Fuchs was finally captured, after a bomb he had built detonated in his hands, costing him his left arm and leaving him severely injured, Austria breathed a strange mix of emotions: fear, horror, and oddly enough, relief. After 4 relentless years of terror, the man who had haunted an entire nation had a face. But capturing Fuchs was only the beginning. Because what he revealed next chilled the country all over again. When he finally stepped into the light, Franz Fuchs didn't look like a killer. There was no aura of violence about him. No obvious signs of radical extremism. He was a frail, middle-aged man, socially isolated, soft-spoken, a failed electrical engineer who had drifted through life, mostly unnoticed. Neighbors described him as strange, withdrawn, always grumbling about the government. But no one imagined this seemingly miserable man was the mastermind behind 25 bomb attacks, killing 4 people and injuring at least 15 others. Inside Fuchs' home, police discovered a treasure trove of evidence. The exact typewriter used to compose anonymous threats. Hundreds of blueprints and sketches for bomb designs. Explosives, detonators, wires, and electrical triggers. And most disturbingly, over 100 hate-filled letters. Each one signed by an organization called the Bavarian Liberation Army. But the shocking truth: that organization never existed. It was a figment of Fuchs' imagination, a fantasy army invented by a man consumed by hatred, using it to legitimize his violent crusade. In 1999, Fuchs stood trial. The courtroom became a national spectacle, with thousands following the case in real time through news and TV coverage. Fuchs, now one-armed and gaunt, showed no signs of remorse. He described, in chilling detail, how he designed each bomb to detonate only when the target opened it. How he changed wiring styles to confuse forensic investigators. How he handpicked targets, Roma families, immigrants, politicians, priests, journalists. "I didn't hate them personally," he said. "I hated what they represented." A sentence as cold and calculated as the devices he built. On March 10, 1999, Franz Fuchs was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Austria could finally breathe. But just 1 year later, in February 2000, a shockwave hit the country again. Franz Fuchs was found dead in his prison cell, hanged. Authorities claimed it was suicide, using the belt from his wheelchair. But the public wasn't convinced. How could a man with only one arm, in a maximum security prison under constant surveillance, manage to hang himself? Rumors swirled. Was he helped? Did someone silence him? Or was this the final, calculated act of a man who always wanted the last word? Franz Fuchs' death wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of a much deeper reckoning. A domestic terrorist had operated undetected for years. A so-called civilized society had ignored the warning signs. And the nation had to ask itself, were we ever truly safe? Franz Fuchs wasn't just a mass murderer. He was a mirror held up to Austria's blind spots. He wasn't insane. He was the product of prolonged isolation and radicalized hate allowed to fester in silence. The final question isn't, why did Fuchs do this? It's, what did we overlook that allowed him to? Some crimes end on paper, but their echoes remain forever in the hearts of the living. Franz Fuchs is dead. The explosions have stopped. The ghost of the so-called Bavarian Liberation Army vanished as if it had never existed. But the fear remains. People still flinch when opening a mailbox. The scars still linger on the bodies of those who survived. And the grief of families who lost their loved ones, that pain never truly fades. The horror of Franz Fuchs wasn't only in the bombs. It lay in his ability to turn words into bullets, and fear into a weapon of control. Each letter he wrote, dripping with hate. Each explosive he handcrafted with what remained of his body. They were silent testimonies to a society that had failed to recognize the warning signs within itself. Fuchs didn't become a killer overnight. He slipped deeper into hatred, slowly, over years. Fueled by loneliness, bitterness, and a world that simply looked away. And the most terrifying question is, How many more Franz Fuchs are out there, still unnoticed? Questions we must ask ourselves. What created Franz Fuchs? A society that fails to hear the isolated? A security system that can't see beyond traditional threats? Or a culture that's too afraid to confront the seeds of extremism blooming in silence? His crimes force us to ask ourselves, are we truly vigilant about the hatred spreading quietly around us? Are we unknowingly building a world where evil can grow unseen? The Franz Fuchs case isn't just Austria's tragedy. It is a mirror held up to the entire world. A warning about extremism. A warning about silence. A warning about how even basic technology, when wielded by hate, can destroy lives. If you're still watching this video, it means something inside you is stirred. A discomfort. A concern. A refusal to forget. And that's exactly the point. Stories like Franz Fuchs must be told. Not to glorify evil, but to ensure it never happens again. Only by staring into the dark can we begin to appreciate the light. Thank you for watching until the very end. If this story moved you, if you believe more people should know about it, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We'll continue uncovering the hidden chapters of humanity's darkest stories. What are your thoughts about Franz Fuchs and this chilling case? Let us know in the comments. We're here to listen.